She didn't wear the uniform to make a point, just black PT shorts, a faded army shirt, and an old duffel thrown over her shoulder. Quiet, almost invisible, just like so many mornings before. But the admin officer barely looked at her before saying, "You can't wear that, not unless you're active duty." He ordered her to change or leave the base. No argument, no scene. She turned to go, her posture steady, and as she walked away, the back of her shirt lifted just enough for someone across the room to see the tattoo on her upper back. And that's when everything stopped. Because that ink didn't come from a tattoo parlor or a moment of rebellion. It came from a mission that never made the news, but changed the course of someone still in command. Want to know what that tattoo meant and why it made the whole room freeze? Hit subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and tell us where you're watching from. Let's begin. The New Mexico sun rose slow and merciless over the highway, painting everything in harsh gold and dusty shadows as Elena Morgan guided her battered Tacoma toward the gates of Fort Ridgeline. The world out here always felt on the verge of burning away, a horizon that shimmered and blurred, full of silence except for the thrum of old memories that sometimes surfaced unbidden. This morning, the sky seemed emptier than usual. Her hands, knotted with old scars and the fine tremor of age, gripped the wheel with the same steadiness she once used to hold a rifle. As the base came into view, Elena glanced at her reflection in the cracked rear-view 46, hair pulled back tight, streaks of iron grey cutting through what had once been chestnut brown, eyes a little sunken but never dull. She wore what she'd always worn for runs, a faded army PT shirt, soft from years of washing, and black shorts that had lost their shape but not their story. Her name had once been stitched in sharp black thread across the chest, but time and soap had erased it, leaving only the faintest outline, like a secret for those who knew where to look. A dog tag sat beneath her collar, clinking softly with every bump in the road, a steady heartbeat she carried from one world to another. Today was not a day for pride. Elena didn't come back to Fort Ridgeline to reclaim anything or to parade old glories before a new generation. She'd said yes to Sergeant Major Frank Harris's invitation because she owed that much to the next crop of women just beginning their journey, young, uncertain, desperate for a sign that strength sometimes lived in the most unlikely places. As her truck rolled past the checkpoint, she flashed her ID to the young guard who barely looked up, lost in his phone and whatever group chat was lighting up his morning. She parked by the admin building, eyeing the rows of new model government SUVs and the tight formation of recruits on the track, their nervous voices carrying in the cool air. Elena stepped out into the light, feeling the stare of the sun on her bare arms, the little stings of judgment she knew would come. Already, a pair of admin staffers standing by the side door stopped talking as soon as she passed, one tilting her head and murmuring something Elena couldn't quite hear. She caught fragments anyway. Cosplay, too old for this, who does she think she is? But let it slide. That was the trick, always had been. Don't let them see it land. She walked through the glass doors and into a world of chilled air, humming fluorescents, and a dozen sets of unfamiliar eyes. Her appearance triggered a chain reaction. One young specialist, Kevin Riley, pulled out his phone and snapped a surreptitious photo, immediately firing it off into the base's group chat with a smirk. "Who let Grandma play Army?" read the first reply, as Elena, unaware, stood quietly in the lobby, waiting her turn at the counter. The staff behind the desk exchanged looks, the kind that didn't need words. Someone's voice, sharp and low, cut through. Shouldn't she be home watching TV or something? In the reflection of a dusty display case, Elena could just make out a pair of junior officers in pressed uniforms, eyes narrowed as they whispered about the faded tattoo peeking from beneath the collar of her shirt. None of them recognized its meaning, only that it looked out of place, an echo from a world none of them had seen. One officer, Lieutenant Eric Sanders, checked the roster with performative care, his tone just a little too polite as he asked for her paperwork. Another test, another silent invitation to leave. Outside, a group of young recruits, half stretching, half checking their phones, snickered as a meme popped up in their chat, Elena's photo, overlaid with a childish caption. Mason Price, one of the more outspoken privates, laughed aloud. "What's next, Senior Citizen Day at the firing range?" The joke caught, spreading through the group with the speed of boredom and nervousness. Elena ignored the laughter, the glances, the edge of condescension slicing through the air. She'd been here before, in different places with different faces, but always the same undercurrent: you don't belong. What they didn't know was that every step she took was a step that someone else had given her. Every scar, every faded line of ink on her skin, every ache in her bones, none of it was for show. She settled her duffel at her feet and waited, silent, letting the morning light catch the faded numbers just visible between her shoulder blades. As Elena stood in the sharp chill of the admin lobby, the weight of every glance settled across her shoulders like dust. She could almost feel the story building behind her back. Each smirk, each whisper, each message pinged from phone to phone, an invisible tide pressing in. It was the same everywhere. Younger faces quick to judge what they didn't understand, slow to ask the questions that mattered. The clock on the wall ticked louder than any voice, and with every passing minute, it seemed the room's suspicion thickened, fed by the group chat and the easy cruelty of strangers. She busied herself by checking her folded authorization letter, fingers tracing its edge, remembering how many times she'd unfolded papers like this before: orders, citations, letters home written in the cramped dark of foreign barracks. She noticed her reflection in the glass once more, upright posture, face set in a line between patience and stubbornness. Behind her, two civilian admin workers exchanged a knowing look, one of them raising her eyebrows as if to ask, "What's she trying to prove?" For a moment, Elena's mind flickered back to a different morning, 1 year ago, in a place hotter, louder, more dangerous. She remembered the scent of cordite, the dull ache in her legs after a night spent listening for engines in the darkness. The memory came in brief flashes, the faces of women she'd run beside, sweat streaking their cheeks, grit and hope shining in their eyes. Those memories lived beneath her skin, nestled next to the ink that marked her as one of the Night Falcon, even if no one here would ever know what that meant. A sudden shout outside the glass startled her. One of the recruits, tripping over his own laces, had fallen and now sat rubbing his knee while his friends snorted. The brief commotion drew the attention of everyone in the lobby, including Lieutenant Sanders, who now appeared at the counter with a look of officious concern. "Miss Morgan," he called, his voice carrying just enough authority to hush the laughter. "May I see your paperwork, please?" His eyes moved to her faded shirt, then back to her face, searching for any sign of defiance. Elena handed over the folded letter, her hand steady. "Authorization from Sergeant Major Harris. I'm here to support today's evaluation." She kept her tone level, giving nothing away. Sanders glanced at the papers, then at her, then at the staffers who'd stopped filing and were now openly listening. The silence in the room sharpened, taut as wire. One staffer whispered, "It can't be real. They never let the old ones back unless there's a shortage." A low notification tone buzzed from behind the counter. Another meme, this time Elena's face pasted onto a cartoonish action figure, captioned, "Operation Golden Years." Riley, the specialist, snickered before catching Sanders's glare and stifling it with a cough. Sanders looked again at the letter, then at Elena, as if trying to place her in a file he'd never read. But even as the scrutiny built, Elena felt something else shift, a quiet defiance, a reminder that she was not here for their approval. She remembered Harris's words, someone who's been through the worst, someone who can show them what it means to keep going. That was all that mattered. If she had to be a lightning rod for every rumor and snide comment, so be it. She straightened her shoulders and met Sanders's gaze, unflinching. Let them whisper, let them judge. The truth, like the tattoo between her shoulders, was always just beneath the surface, waiting for the right eyes to see. Lieutenant Eric Sanders took an extra moment, as if hoping the crispness of his uniform might compensate for the uncertainty in his expression. He shifted the authorization letter between his fingers, eyes darting between the faded ink and the woman standing before him. "This is unusual, Miss Morgan," he said at last, his tone blending polite detachment with a hint of irritation. "Volunteers aren't generally permitted to wear the Army PT uniform unless they're on active assignment. You understand the regulations, I'm sure." His words hovered between question and accusation, as if daring her to push back, to assert a right she no longer had. Elena waited. She knew the script. She'd seen it play out with other veterans, especially those whose time had been marked not by medals but by silence. She stood silent, letting the tension stretch, her features impassive. A civilian admin, an older woman with tired eyes and a mouth fixed in a permanent line of disapproval, leaned over the counter, her voice pitched just loud enough for the room. "Base policy's pretty clear," she said. "If we let everyone parade around in uniform just because they served a tour, it'd be chaos. That shirt is for soldiers on the roster, not for retirees." Her colleague, a balding man with a stack of folders clutched to his chest, nodded in agreement. "Rules are rules. Next thing you know, half the town will be playing Army dress-up." Specialist Riley watched the exchange with a half-suppressed grin, thumb hovering over his phone. The group chat buzzed with new comments. "She's gonna cry regulation. Did someone call her Uber?" The jokes landed in real time, the room charged with the kind of energy that feeds on discomfort. Sanders held out a plastic-wrapped T-shirt, a generic navy blue with the words Fort Ridgeline emblazoned in bold letters across the chest. "You're welcome to stay and assist with the evaluation," he said, all reasonableness now, but his posture stiff. "But you'll need to change into this. I can't allow unauthorized uniform elements on the track. Please understand, this is about maintaining order." Elena looked at the offered shirt. For a heartbeat, something flickered across her face, anger maybe or disappointment, but it vanished almost as soon as it appeared. She didn't argue. She didn't protest. Instead, she nodded once and reached for her duffel. The eyes of the entire lobby followed her, some expectant, others triumphant, as if waiting for her to make a scene. A few recruits who drifted inside for water paused, their conversations stalling as they watched the drama unfold. The civilian woman shook her head, muttering, "That's what happens when people can't let go." My uncle was the same, kept telling war stories, wearing his old jacket to the store. Embarrassing, really. The man beside her chuckled, replying in a stage whisper, "Probably just wants attention. That age, it's all about reliving the past." Outside, the laughter from the group of young soldiers drifted through the glass. Mason Price, louder than the rest, mimicked an old woman's shuffle, sending the group into fits of laughter. Even those who hadn't seen Elena's picture on their phones joined in. No one wanted to be left out of the joke. Elena paused by the bench to sit, her duffel at her feet. She untied her sneakers with careful precision, taking a moment to breathe, to center herself. The humiliation was sharp, but she let it pass over her like so many things before. Every base, every deployment, every classroom back in civilian life, there had always been someone who thought they knew better, someone who needed to assert authority just to feel it. She slipped her arms out of the faded PT shirt, folding it neatly and tucking it away. For a moment, her back was exposed, muscle still defined beneath the lines of age, the tattoo half visible under the straps of her sports bra. She caught a glimpse of herself in the window. Older, yes, but unbowed, a living contradiction to every assumption floating around her. She pulled on the navy t-shirt, its newness stiff and foreign, and rose to her feet. Sanders stood nearby, arms folded, his posture satisfied, as if some minor crisis had been averted. "Thank you for understanding, Miss Morgan," he said, but there was no warmth in it, just the hollow sound of someone following procedure. She picked up her bag and returned to the lobby, passing the admin staff with measured steps. "It's for the best," one of them offered, in a tone that suggested the opposite. "We can't have everyone thinking they're special." The words stung, but Elena let them slide off her as she headed toward the track, eyes forward. For a brief moment as she passed, a younger woman, Private Lily Thompson, her uniform crisp, her gaze uncertain, looked up at Elena with something between apology and admiration. Elena met her eyes, nodded once, then continued outside, where the sun waited, relentless and honest. She'd worn many uniforms in her life. Today, it seemed, she would wear something tougher, patience, and the determination not to let anyone else define her worth. The air outside felt different after the encounter, not just hotter, but charged with something sour, an aftertaste of embarrassment and skepticism that seemed to follow Elena as she approached the registration tent beside the track. She moved with purposeful steps, determined not to let the sting of the admin lobby cling to her any longer than necessary. Yet it was clear, even in the sunlight, that the doubts inside the building had already leaked out among the staff waiting at the next checkpoint. A folding table blocked the entrance to the track, manned by another civilian staffer. A young woman with dark hair pulled into a too-tight bun, badge glinting under her windbreaker. She barely looked up from her tablet when Elena offered her ID and the authorization letter. "Name?" the woman asked, voice flat. "Elena Morgan. I'm here to assist with the female recruits evaluation, authorized by Sergeant Major Harris." The staffer scrolled, tapped, frowned. "Not seeing you on my list. You got clearance paperwork?" Elena handed over the sheet, watching as the staffer scanned each line with exaggerated care. The silence stretched behind Elena. A few early arriving recruits lingered, murmuring as they glanced her way. "You'll need to wait here while I verify this," the staffer finally said, then turned her back and began typing, slowly, as if the effort of confirming a name might upend the entire morning. The minutes dragged. The sun climbed higher, baking the gravel underfoot and sending waves of heat up from the tarmac. More recruits gathered nearby, stretching, laughing, tossing looks in Elena's direction. Someone whispered, "Guess they're not letting her through. Can't say I blame them." A few others chuckled, as if they were all in on a private joke. The group chat on their phones kept pinging, her name, her image, a flurry of new memes born from boredom and bravado. Elena stood her ground. Her patience was a discipline, carved out of years spent waiting in far worse places, in far harsher company. She reminded herself of Harris's voice, "They'll try to box you out, don't let them," but inside, the gnaw of doubt had started. Would they find some excuse to turn her away, after all the trouble it took just to stand here? Finally, the staffer returned, face pinched. "Still waiting on confirmation from the admin building. You'll have to wait over there." She pointed to a patch of shade well away from the others, as if distance might contain the risk of embarrassment. Elena complied, seating herself on the edge of a concrete planter, her duffel beside her. Sweat gathered along her temples, but she forced her breathing to slow, her expression neutral. The other staff whispered to one another in clusters, occasionally casting sidelong glances her way. Time seemed to warp, each minute expanding, while the memory of the admin's earlier words echoed, "Can't have everyone thinking they're special." The recruit stares began to shift, from mere curiosity to a mix of skepticism and discomfort. Elena felt herself becoming a cautionary tale, a living reminder of how easily respect could be withheld. The sun crept across the sky as Elena sat in forced solitude, the hard concrete at her side steadily leaching warmth through the navy t-shirt. 15 minutes stretched into half an hour. With every passing group of recruits jogging by, the looks grew less discreet. Some overtly curious, others openly skeptical, a few thinly veiled with derision. One pair of young soldiers, fresh stripes barely stitched onto their sleeves, strolled past and, in voices too loud to be accidental, speculated about what she'd done to get benched from the main event. Probably showed up thinking she could just take charge. One snickered. Some people just don't know when to quit. At the checkpoint table, the staffer continued her pantomime of diligence, scrolling through her tablet and making periodic calls on her radio. Still no response from admin. Over, she repeated, drawing out the syllables, as if reporting a national emergency. Occasionally she'd glance Elena's way, lips pursed as if considering a trespasser instead of a volunteer. A senior NCO, his sergeant's chevrons gleaming, wandered over to check on the delay. The staffer quickly explained, authorizations not matching up could be a clerical error. She says Sergeant Major Harris sent her, but, well, you know how it is with these old forms. The NCO looked Elena up and down, shrugged, and offered a half-hearted, "Regulations, ma'am." Can't be too careful. His words might have been intended as comfort, but they landed as another thin excuse. Inside the admin office, unseen by Elena, the paperwork had long since been passed from hand to hand. Someone had printed it, someone else had misplaced it, and a third person now debated whether to call Sergeant Major Harris or just wait for the situation to resolve itself. Every delay was another chance for doubt to take root. From her seat outside, Elena could almost feel the inertia. How easily bureaucracy could become a weapon, not by design, but by sheer indifference. Her phone buzzed once with a text from Harris. "Hang in there. If they give you grief, let me know." She smiled despite herself, tucking the phone away, unwilling to surrender her dignity to frustration. The shade receded inch by inch as noon approached. Sweat gathered at her brow, and her patience frayed. Yet she stayed, unyielding, refusing to provide the outburst some onlookers seemed to hope for. In a world obsessed with visible action, Elena understood the power of endurance. Finally, after nearly 40 minutes, the staffer returned, barely making eye contact. "Admin says you can proceed, but next time bring a printed copy of your clearance. Makes things easier for everyone." There was no apology, only the faintest edge of relief that the awkwardness might at last be over. Elena thanked her, gathered her duffel and stood. As she walked toward the track, the tension in her shoulders didn't ease. The recruits, having watched the whole ordeal, now wore new expressions: wariness, embarrassment, even a touch of awe. They'd seen her patience, her composure under fire of a different kind. Some looked away, others met her gaze with newfound respect. But the day, Elena knew, was only just beginning. Private Mason Price lounged beneath the shade of a half-dead mesquite, phone outstretched in his hand, eyes glued to the flood of messages bouncing through the Ridgeline recruits group chat. The image of Elena Morgan, her jaw set, face shaded by the bill of her cap as she sat alone, was now the hottest topic on base, snapped and uploaded by Specialist Riley with the caption, "Commander Grandma, lost on the way to bingo night." Price's reply, quick as a shot, sent the group into a frenzy, a doctored meme of Elena in a walker, chasing recruits around the track, texted over with, "PT test, senior division." Within minutes, new versions poured in. Elena photoshopped in every humiliating context, each more exaggerated than the last. There she was, clutching a cane, here, pushing a shopping cart down the PX aisle. Laughter spread in waves. Some of the soldiers, many still teenagers or barely past it, barely contained their giggles as they glanced over at the real woman sitting silent and unbothered on her concrete perch. Others, the quieter recruits, mostly women, tried to focus on stretching or tightening their laces, but their eyes betrayed a tension, embarrassment, or maybe even a fear that being associated with her would make them targets too. The chat turned meaner as boredom grew. A corporal added, "Bet she tells stories about walking uphill both ways to basic." Another, "Does the army do refunds on social security?" The cruelty wasn't new. Elena had seen its like before, on bases and in barracks, in jokes that always landed sharpest on the ones who didn't have power. But this time, it cut through more than just reputation. It set the mood for everyone. The staffers at the track, checking names and directing groups, began treating Elena's presence as a punchline. Every interaction took on a slightly mocking edge. Private Lily Thompson, waiting nervously for her own evaluation, checked her phone and scrolled through the latest string of memes, her lips pressing together in a tight line. She felt the undercurrent of the group's judgment. She'd seen what happened to anyone who stood out, anyone the group deemed other. She glanced across the field at Elena, wondering if the stories about her were true. Was she really just a washed-up retiree who couldn't let go, or was there something the others were missing? Back near the admin tent, Lieutenant Sanders caught a snippet of the group chat over Riley's shoulder. "That's enough," he said, not unkindly but without real conviction. He scrolled anyway, the corners of his mouth twitching with amusement before he forced his expression back to official neutrality. Sanders was too junior to challenge the group's mood outright, and too interested in fitting in to risk being mocked himself. He turned away, making a show of checking his clipboard, but his discomfort lingered. Elena, meanwhile, could feel the energy shifting. She'd learned to read rooms, to sense when attention turned sour. Every time a phone screen lit up and laughter erupted, she understood the joke was at her expense. She resisted the urge to flinch, to fold into herself or react. Instead, she adjusted her posture, lifting her chin, eyes steady on the horizon. As the memes cycled through dozens of phones, a nervous current crackled beneath the surface of the morning routine. The recruits split into clusters, those eager to pile on the next joke, those too wary to participate but unwilling to challenge the mood. And those, mostly the new female trainees, who withdrew into themselves, their confidence chipping away with each new round of ridicule. Among them, Private Lily Thompson glanced around, hoping to find someone else who looked as uncomfortable as she felt. It wasn't just the mocking that bothered her, but the way the mood spread, as if one woman's dignity could be stripped away simply for refusing to hide her years, her scars, or her right to stand here. She watched Mason Price lead another round of laughter, noticed the way his friends followed suit, then eyed Elena, still calm and unmoved on the edge of the group. Lily wondered if she'd be that resilient if the roles were reversed. Other recruits began to echo the chat's jokes aloud. "Heard we're getting a discount at the pharmacy today," someone called out, drawing easy laughs. The staff at the registration table exchanged grins, trading snide remarks just low enough to avoid official censure. Even the training NCO, a usually stern figure, cracked a faint smile as a meme appeared on his own phone. A doctored shot of Elena leading the training run from a mobility scooter. The collective mood was now openly dismissive, the cruelty transformed from digital rumor to a shared, spoken reality. Yet amid the snickers, a small tension simmered. Some of the women who'd quietly admired the thought of a seasoned veteran returning to guide them now began to question their own excitement. Doubt slipped in. If the group was right, and Elena Morgan was just a relic, what did it mean for them? Would they too become punchlines one day for daring to persist, to stand out, to age without apology? Elena felt the eyes, heard the jokes ricocheting back and forth, but refused to shrink. She busied herself checking her duffel, reviewing her notes, stretching out muscles stiff from waiting. If she noticed the way staffers looked right through her, or the way some of the recruits eyed her as if she were a warning, she gave no sign. She was not here for their approval. Her years had taught her that sometimes the lesson wasn't for those who mocked, but for those who watched and wondered if standing alone was possible. After a while, the group chat's fever faded, replaced by the buzz of the coming evaluation. But the tone had been set. The story of the day was clear. Elena Morgan, out of place, out of time. She caught Lily's gaze and gave the slightest nod, as if passing a private message. You are not as alone as you think. For a second, Lily straightened, drawing a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. On the far side of the track, Mason Price loaded up one final meme, tagging it, "Old soldiers never die, they just hold up the line." This too was met with laughter, but even as Elena stood apart, there was a new awareness in the air. Beneath the mockery, something like curiosity. Some of the younger women watched her closely now, studying the way she carried herself, not cowed, not ashamed, but quietly certain. They wondered, and some hoped, that there might be more to her than the group chat ever let on. The sun was relentless by late morning, burning away what little coolness the desert had offered at dawn. Elena, finally cleared for the track, slung her duffel over her shoulder and moved toward the bleachers, feeling every stare press against her back. She kept her steps measured, each stride a silent refusal to be hurried or diminished by the crowd's judgment. As she found a seat at the far end, half in shadow, half in light, she let herself relax for just a breath, stretching her arms and rolling her shoulders to loosen old knots. Unbeknownst to Elena, Staff Sergeant Mike Alvarez was passing nearby, clipboard in hand and brow furrowed over a morning's worth of maintenance checklists. He was a man who prided himself on routine, never one to linger on gossip or drama. But something in the corner of his eye caught his attention. The way Elena's shirt, damp with sweat, clung tighter across her upper back as she reached up to tie her hair. For a moment, the lines of a tattoo, partly obscured but unmistakable, stood out against her skin. It was nothing like the decorative pieces he'd seen on other soldiers. Instead, it was simple, almost stark, the blocky digits 819 flanked by the wings of a falcon, talons outstretched. Alvarez froze mid-step, clipboard suddenly heavy in his grip. The memory struck hard. A classified briefing years ago, where young analysts were warned never to repeat what they'd read about certain missions or units. Night Falcon 819, the code name whispered in after-action reports, always half-redacted, always followed by long silences. He remembered the map lines, the casualty lists, the legends traded in hushed tones among staff who understood the cost of what never made it to the news. He watched Elena for another heartbeat, stunned. The morning's jokes and memes flickered through his mind, suddenly tasteless. Here she was, right in front of him, wearing scars and ink that most would never understand. Alvarez's pulse picked up. He glanced around. The crowd of recruits, the admin staff, Lieutenant Sanders, still busy posturing at the track. Nobody else seemed to notice. He swallowed, forced himself to keep walking, but the image burned itself into his memory. Reaching the shadow of the equipment shed, Alvarez pulled out his phone, fingers trembling. He hesitated, then dialed the number he remembered from that old, nearly burned packet. An emergency liaison code, meant for classified reporting only. The line clicked. The automated voice confirmed a secure connection, and then a pause. Dead air that carried its own weight. Alvarez steadied himself. "This is Staff Sergeant Alvarez at Fort Ridgeline. I believe we have a possible Night Falcon identification on site." He waited, listening to the background hush of shuffling papers and the low murmur of voices, feeling the gravity of secrets as old as his career. The voice on the other end responded with the kind of clipped professionalism that only came from headquarters. "Repeat, Sergeant." You're confirming a Night Falcon 819 identification, visual or verbal? Alvarez's own voice sounded oddly small in the silence of the shed. Visual, sir. Tattoo. Block numbers and Falcon insignia, upper back. Individual matches profile. Retired female, present at Fort Ridgeline, currently volunteering with training support. A pause. The background hum sharpened, as if more people were suddenly listening in. Acknowledged. Hold location. Do not engage or approach further. Will coordinate with command. This report does not leave this line. Alvarez hung up, the phone still hot in his palm. He let out a slow breath, tension leaking from his shoulders. The sense of being swept into something bigger than himself lingered. He thought of the memes, the jokes, the careless words echoing around the track just minutes before, and felt a flush of shame. What if even half the stories were true? What if the woman they'd mocked was the one who'd held the line on that desperate night, giving other people like him, a future they'd never even know to be grateful for? Back by the bleachers, Elena sat quietly, watching the latest group of recruits line up for warm-ups. For the first time all morning, a subtle shift ran through the crowd. Some of the staff now eyed her with uncertainty rather than mockery, catching whispers of the phone call Alvarez had made, though they didn't know its details. A couple of the older NCOs lingered nearby, their conversations turning, voices lowering, as if aware something out of the ordinary was about to unfold. Lieutenant Sanders received a short, urgent message on his radio, his face tightening as he glanced from the device to Elena and back again. Something in his posture changed. He stood a little straighter, wariness creeping into his eyes. A ripple of curiosity spread outward as staffers began to pick up on the tension, passing it like static down the line of volunteers and admin workers. Meanwhile, Alvarez left the shed and skirted the edge of the field, scanning the faces of his fellow staff with new caution. He avoided eye contact, wary of revealing even a hint of what he'd learned. For the first time in years, he felt the real weight of the uniform. The responsibility to recognize honor, not just enforce procedure. On the field, the recruits prepared for their first run, nerves and excitement returning as focus shifted toward the physical challenge ahead. But beneath the surface, the mood had changed. The laughter and scorn, so loud just moments before, now sat uneasily atop a growing sense of anticipation, a knowledge, even if vague, that something bigger than all of them was in motion. Elena stood, stretching her legs, the numbers on her back catching the sun for an instant, bold, clear, impossible to ignore. Lily Thompson watched from a distance, her anxiety shifting toward a curious kind of hope. The story of the day was not over. In fact, for everyone on that field, it was only just beginning. A hush fell over the field as a vehicle rolled to a halt near the admin building. It was a nondescript government SUV, yet somehow the sight of it drew attention like a storm cloud. The doors opened in sequence, first a junior officer, then Major Julia Bennett, and finally Colonel Travis McCall, tall, broad-shouldered, the authority in his presence unmistakable even from a distance. He walked with an easy, unhurried confidence, ribbons glinting above his heart, hair silvered at the temples but eyes sharp as a hawk's. Conversation across the base stalled as he strode toward the bleachers, his path a quiet command that cleared all obstacles. Elena noticed the stillness before she saw its cause. The movement of bodies paused mid-action, voices died away, and even the click of phones and rustle of paperwork seemed to fade as McCall's shadow approached. She recognized his face instantly. Though years had etched new lines, the gravity he carried was unchanged. As he stopped before her, recruits on the track straightened, staffers unconsciously moved aside, and a circle of uneasy respect opened in the crowd. Colonel McCall clasped his hands behind his back, boots planted firmly in the desert dust. For a moment he said nothing, simply studying Elena as if cataloguing every scar and memory mapped across her features. Then, in a voice deep but calm, He addressed her not as a subordinate, not even as a visitor, but as an equal. "Miss Morgan," he said, letting the title hang in the hot air, "I hear there's been some confusion about your authorization and your place here." He paused, looking her up and down, gaze lingering for just a second on the faded edges of the tattoo, half revealed beneath her collar. "That mark on your back," he continued, his voice lowering. "Where did you earn it?" There was a hush, a pressure, as if the whole base was listening in, not daring to exhale. Elena met his gaze, unflinching. "Northern Border, Syria. Operation Sentinel, April 2001. Rear element, Night Falcon 819. The words were delivered with quiet certainty, the weight of 2 decades pressed into a handful of syllables. For a heartbeat, McCall's face hardened with the memory of distant violence. Then his jaw softened, and he took a step closer, dropping his voice to a register meant only for her. "My sister," he said quietly, "Private First Class Monica McCall. She was with that convoy." A ripple of surprise ran through the onlookers. McCall continued, voice thick with something that might have been pain or gratitude. "She came home because someone held the flank when everyone else fell back, because someone made it possible for the rest of them to reach the airfield. That someone was you, wasn't it?" Elena's lips tightened, and for a moment the steel in her eyes flickered with old grief. Didn't know her name at the time, just knew she was in the last truck. "We all did what we could." McCall nodded, a ghost of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "She lived another 16 years, got married, had a family, died peacefully in her sleep last December." His gaze grew distant, then returned to the present with renewed focus. "That's worth more than all the medals the Army ever gave me, and worth more than any regulation about shirts or rosters." He straightened, then did something nobody had expected. Right there, on the edge of the track, under the blistering sun and the watchful eyes of staff and recruits alike, Colonel McCall brought his hand up in a sharp, formal salute. Every conversation ceased. Even the youngest soldiers recognized the significance. This was not a token gesture, but the purest form of honor one soldier could give another. For a long moment he held the salute, then dropped his hand with the same precision, turning to address the gathering crowd. His voice, when it came, was loud enough to carry across the field, to every ear tuned for a verdict. If Sergeant First Class Elena Morgan wants to wear her uniform, she wears it. If she wants to support our training, she supports it. And if anyone has a problem with that, they come to me directly. Effective immediately, my command authority stands. A collective breath seemed to release across the field as Colonel McCall's declaration echoed. The weight of official authority had shifted in an instant, and the atmosphere transformed from rigid suspicion to something close to reverence. Recruits who only minutes ago had joined the chorus of jokes now stood at attention, faces flushed with a complex mix of embarrassment and awe. Even Mason Price and his crew, ringleaders of the mockery, fell silent, glancing at each other as if realizing too late that they'd misjudged the story unfolding before them. Major Julia Bennett, who had arrived quietly with McCall, stepped forward, her composure as crisp as her uniform. Her eyes met Elena's, steady, no longer evaluating, but now filled with the recognition that comes from years of service and the humility to admit an error. "Ms. Morgan," she said, voice clear, "on behalf of this command, I want to apologize for the delays and the doubts you encountered today. I take full responsibility. We failed to process your clearance as promptly as we should have. And, more importantly, we failed to recognize the caliber of service standing in front of us." She took a breath, letting the words settle. "Your record, your example, and your sacrifice. These are what our army should be about. Please accept my apology and my respect." Elena inclined her head, words unnecessary. The message was received not just by her, but by every soldier and staff member witnessing the exchange. It was more than an apology. It was a public admission that respect and honor should not be buried under layers of bureaucracy or dismissed with cynical jokes. Major Bennett turned to Lieutenant Sanders, who stood rigid, shame coloring his cheeks. "See to it that this never happens again, Lieutenant, and pass the word." Effective immediately, command policy is updated. Veterans supporting official training events are authorized to wear appropriate uniform elements at the commander's discretion. Questions about that discretion come straight to my office or to Colonel McCall. Lieutenant Sanders swallowed, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Understood." Colonel McCall faced the formation of recruits, now gathered in an uneasy semicircle, their attention locked. "You all saw what happened here today," he said. "Every base, every generation sometimes forgets that the foundation we stand on was built by those who came before us. Don't let procedure or popular opinion blind you to character or to courage. If you're lucky, you'll get to serve alongside people like Sergeant First Class Morgan. You'll learn more from her example than from any manual I could assign." A soft murmur passed through the ranks. Private Lily Thompson, at the edge of the crowd, felt her heart race with something between relief and pride. She remembered the look Elena had given her, a look that now, in the context of this public vindication, seemed like an invitation to stand tall, to refuse to be small or silent in the face of mockery. Elena felt a tide of emotion rise within her. Gratitude, vindication, the ache of old wounds that would never fully close. She kept her face composed, but her eyes shone as Colonel McCall stepped closer and, in a lower voice, said, "Thank you for coming back, for not walking away, even when it would have been easier." She replied quietly, "I came because someone needs to show them that strength isn't always loud, sir. Sometimes it's just about standing your ground." McCall nodded, understanding perfectly. With a gesture, he motioned for Elena to join him as they made their way toward the front of the formation. The crowd parted respectfully. The staff who had earlier doubted her now avoided her gaze or offered small, awkward nods of acknowledgement. Mason Price, once bold in his mockery, kept his eyes fixed on the ground, a silent lesson written on his posture for all to see. The feeling in the air had changed. There was no more laughter at Elena's expense. Instead, a hushed respect spread, coupled with an unspoken promise to watch, to remember, and to try, if only a little harder, to live up to the example they'd seen that morning. The message had been delivered to every corner of Fort Ridgeline. Dignity cannot be revoked by age or by regulation or by the casual cruelty of a group chat. Some honors were earned in silence, and some heroes did not need medals to prove their worth. The morning heat pressed down harder as the base returned to its routines, but the atmosphere was irrevocably changed. News of Colonel McCall's public salute and Major Bennett's apology spread with the speed of wildfire. For the first time, recruits lingered nearby not to gawk or snicker, but to observe Elena Morgan with new eyes, curiosity tempered by a deep, if unspoken, respect. Even those who had laughed loudest now gave her a wide berth, uncertain, chastened, aware they'd witnessed something they would remember far longer than any regulation or training drill. Elena found a quiet spot beneath the bleachers, taking a moment to herself, her mind busy with the morning's events and the faces, young and old, who'd watched every step. She was not one for speeches, nor did she crave the spotlight. Yet she understood the silent weight of example, that sometimes a single person's endurance could reset the tone for an entire generation. Footsteps approached, cautious, light, but determined. Elena looked up to see Private Lily Thompson hesitating at the edge of the shade. The young woman held a water bottle in one hand, her cap askew, eyes bright but anxious. She seemed younger up close, all nervous energy and questions she didn't quite know how to ask. "Ma'am?" Lily's voice was soft but clear, cutting through the low hum of the field. I hope I'm not bothering you. I just wanted to say, She faltered, looking at her boots, then back up. I saw what happened. I saw how you handled it. I guess I was wondering, how do you do it? How do you not let it get to you when everyone's got something to say? Elena regarded her for a moment, measuring the earnestness in her face. It does get to me, she answered honestly. You just learn, after a while, not to show it unless you need to. Sometimes the only way you can teach people what matters is by refusing to break, no matter how hard they push. If you let them see you flinch, that's what they remember. Not your strength, not your purpose. Lily nodded, her grip tightening on the water bottle. Were you always like that? I mean, strong? Her voice dropped, colored by a vulnerability that reminded Elena of herself years ago on some other track at some other base. Not always, Elena replied, a trace of a smile tugging at her lips. When I started, I doubted myself every day. I wondered if I'd ever be enough for the army, for my team, for myself. The trick isn't to stop doubting, it's to keep moving anyway, even when you're scared, even when people laugh or say you don't belong. She looked out at the open field, the line of recruits forming for their next drill. You'll find your own way, Lily. Just don't let the noise drown out your reason for being here. Lily took a slow breath, absorbing every word. Thank you, she whispered. I think that's what I needed to hear. For the first time that morning she smiled, a small, determined smile that held the promise of persistence. Lily lingered, as if there were more she wanted to ask, but couldn't quite find the words. The noise of boots and commands in the distance faded into a kind of hush between them, a small, private pause amid the noise of military order. Elena sensed her hesitation and waited, unhurried, patient in the way only those who have carried real burdens can be. After a moment, Lily blurted, "Did it ever feel unfair? That people saw the uniform or your age and just decided what you could or couldn't do?" She flushed as soon as she'd asked it, but her gaze was unwavering. "All the time," Elena replied, her tone gentle but edged with the experience of 100 such moments. Not just in the army, either. People love to measure others by what's easy to see. An old shirt, a grey hair, a rumor. It's a defense, I think. If they can put you in a box, they don't have to wonder what you might actually be capable of. She leaned back, letting the sunlight catch the tattoo on her back for just a second. But the truth is, most of the things that matter, courage, patience, loyalty, they don't show up on the outside. Sometimes, the strongest people are the ones who say the least, who stand their ground when it would be easier to walk away. Her eyes met Lily's, steady and kind. Quiet strength isn't about silence. It's about not letting other people's noise make you forget who you are. Lily took that in, her expression shifting from uncertainty to resolve. She looked out across the field at her fellow recruits, now gathered in formation, waiting for their turn under the sun. "Do you think," she asked softly, "it gets easier to hold on to that, to what matters, when the world wants you to give it up?" Elena considered, then answered with honesty. "Sometimes it does, sometimes it gets harder. But it's always worth it. You'll have days when you're the joke, the outsider, the easy target. And you'll have days when someone needs you to show them that it's possible to stand firm, to keep going even when it hurts. That's what service is. Not the uniform, not the rank, but the choice to carry on when you're tired or scared or doubted." She reached out, squeezing Lily's shoulder in a gesture that held both reassurance and challenge. "You won't always see the difference you make, but if you stay true to yourself, you'll be the reason someone else finds their own courage. That's the legacy that matters. Not medals, not recognition, just the quiet ripple you start by refusing to give up." Lily smiled, the last of her anxiety replaced by something bright and unbreakable. She straightened her cap, squared her shoulders, and nodded. "I'll remember," she promised, voice clear, "and I'll try to be that person too." As Lily jogged off to join her unit, Elena watched her go, knowing that for all the pain and resistance of the morning, this was what she had truly come back for, not just to prove herself, but to show the next generation that strength could be quiet, but it could also be contagious. The noon sun beat down, relentless now, glinting off the track as the recruits lined up for their run. Elena emerged from the shade, her navy t-shirt abandoned, the old PT shirt back in place, the tattooed numbers bold beneath the sunlight for all to see. No one stopped her. There was no longer a challenge in the air, only silent acknowledgement. The staffers and NCOs, who only hours before had questioned or mocked her, watched with something like respect, or perhaps regret, for the way things had been handled. Some nodded, a few offered a quiet ma'am as she passed. Colonel McCall stood at the edge of the track, arms folded, observing. His presence seemed to anchor the mood. This was now about more than rules. It was about example, legacy, and the stories that outlast a single morning. Major Bennett, clipboard in hand, coordinated with the trainers, but her gaze kept drifting to Elena, as if to draw strength from the older woman's resolve. Elena took her place at the front of the formation. The recruits were restless, still buzzing from the morning's drama. Mason Price stood a few rows back, hands on his hips, but the swagger was gone from his stance. He glanced sideways at Lily Thompson, who now held her head high, eyes forward, her posture subtly echoing Elena's, shoulders back, jaw set, ready for whatever the day brought. The whistle blew. Elena set off at an even, relentless pace, her stride efficient and unshowy but powerful all the same. The recruits followed, some trying to match her immediately, others cautious, wary of falling behind but afraid to burn out. As the first lap ended, the effort began to show. Heavy breaths, sweat-streaked brows, legs burning with the strain of keeping up. Yet Elena ran as she always had, calm, steady, never showy. She didn't urge anyone to keep up, didn't shout instructions or bark encouragement. Her leadership was a living lesson, to endure, to push forward, not for applause but because it was right. Halfway through, Price, whose sarcasm had once led the group chat, found himself gasping to keep pace. Lily, determined, drew even with Elena, matching her stride for stride. Others rallied, inspired less by competition than by the quiet will of the woman at their head. Even the staff on the sidelines began to cheer, their words of encouragement now free of irony. "Come on, you've got this! Follow Sergeant Morgan!" As the final lap approached, Elena was breathing hard, but her posture remained upright. When she crossed the finish line, she didn't collapse or claim the spotlight. She turned, waited for each recruit, every straggler, every exhausted runner, offering a nod or a quiet word, her presence a balm after the morning's tension. For a long moment, as the group recovered in the grass, no one spoke. The air was thick with exhaustion, but something else, an understanding, a shared pride. In the space where mockery had ruled, a new legend began to grow. Someone whispered, "That's Night Falcon, isn't it?" And the rumor spread not as ridicule, but as awe. As the recruits slowly gathered themselves, the silence on the field was heavy, but it was no longer oppressive. It carried the sense of a lesson learned, of a story retold not with scorn but with admiration. The rumor of Night Falcon had finally changed its nature. It was no longer an old ghost story, but a living example standing before them. The officers and NCOs dispersed in quiet pairs, each one in their own way, replaying the morning's events in their minds. Elena collected her duffel and water bottle, taking a final look at the track. A few recruits approached, some shy, some emboldened by fatigue or gratitude. Mason Price, cheeks still flushed from the run and from something like embarrassment, offered a quick, awkward handshake. "Thanks, Sergeant Morgan," he muttered. "Didn't realize." He trailed off, but Elena offered a nod, absolving without words. Lily Thompson, breathless but beaming, fell into step beside her as Elena made her way back toward the parking lot. "Will you be coming back, ma'am?" she asked, voice tinged with hope. Elena smiled. "If they'll have me, I'll be here, but you don't need me for this anymore. Today you learned you're stronger than what people say." Lily grinned, standing a little taller. "Maybe so, but it helps to see it for real." Near the motor pool, Colonel McCall waited with Major Bennett, both offering Elena the easy camaraderie of equals. "Thank you," McCall said simply, the words heavier than ceremony. "You reminded all of us what this place is supposed to mean." Major Bennett handed Elena an envelope, official, crisp, her clearance formally extended for as long as she chose to serve. "The door is always open, Sergeant," Bennett added, her tone warm. Elena nodded, her gratitude quiet but genuine. As she walked to her Tacoma, she caught glimpses of the recruits in their small clusters, some watching her, some retelling the day's events to each other, others already planning how they'd tackle the next challenge. The laughter that floated across the field now was lighter, free of mockery. It carried an undercurrent of respect and possibility. She started the engine, the old truck rumbling to life. For a moment, Elena hesitated, looking back at Fort Ridgeline, a place of old memories, and now a place where something had shifted. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows across the parade ground and making the numbers on her back glow for one last time in the daylight. As she drove out past the gate, the wind picked up, whipping dust in swirling eddies along the road. Elena smiled, feeling the weight on her shoulders lighten. She knew her story would linger here long after she was gone, not as a cautionary tale, but as a reminder. The recruits who had mocked her would recall the lesson for years. The ones who'd watched her with hope would become the next generation of leaders, carrying forward a different kind of strength. At the edge of the base, she glanced in the mirror one last time. Fort Ridgeline shrank in the distance, but its mark, like the ink on her back, would not fade. Somewhere a new rumor was being born, that sometimes the quietest presence leaves the loudest echo, and that real legacy isn't carved in stone or stitched on uniforms, but carried quietly in the hearts of those who witness true courage. So as Elena's truck faded into the horizon, one chapter closed, but a dozen more quietly began across Fort Ridgeline, echoing in the hearts of those young soldiers she left behind. Maybe today you saw a little of yourself in Elena Morgan, tested, doubted, or quietly standing your ground when the world turned away. Maybe you recognized a moment in your own life where silent strength said more than any words could. We hope this story inspired you as much as it inspired us to share it. If you believe that true courage is often quiet and that legacy lives in everyday choices, let us know what part of Elena's journey resonated with you most. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed a moment of quiet strength or been changed by someone who led by example? If you enjoyed this story, please give us a like and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories every week. We'd love to hear your perspective and grow this community with your voice. And before you go, be sure to check out the videos now appearing on your screen. We've picked them just for you. There's always another story of honor, courage, and second chances waiting for you here. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.